Chicago in January was not a place for the weak. The wind did not simply blow, it hunted, slipping between skyscrapers like a knife in search of skin, stealing warmth from anyone foolish enough to be caught in its path. Flurries drifted down, in lazy spirals, turning the steel and glass towers into faded silhouettes. Somewhere far below, the streets pulsed with movement, yellow cabs inching forward, bundled commuters hurrying to warmth, vendors shouting over the hiss of roasting chestnuts. The city was alive, tireless, indifferent. Jackson Reed moved through it like a ghost. His tailored charcoal overcoat was cut to perfection, cashmere scarf looped neatly at his throat, shoes polished to a gleam, but all of it looked wrong on him now, as though the body inside had already been abandoned. His once sharp stride was reduced to measured, mechanical steps, each one an effort. The air stung his cheeks, but he barely noticed it had been 31 days since the accident. 31 mornings waking in a penthouse large enough to echo, only to find the air still and cold, the rooms deafeningly quiet. 31 days without Sophie's laughter spilling down the hall like sunlight. The subway platform yawned beneath him, the stale underground air heavy with the smell of oil and iron. He descended without thought, just another motion in the endless chain of motions that had replaced living. When the train roared into the station, he stepped inside, claiming an empty seat. The city above kept moving, trading, building, consuming, but down here, Jackson sat frozen, an island of grief adrift in a current he no longer cared to follow. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and drew out his phone. Its screen lit his face with a soft, bluish glow. Sophie's birthday smile filled the frame, golden curls caught in candlelight. Her cheeks flushed with joy. She had turned 6 just 2 weeks before the world decided it was done with her. He traced a thumb across the image, smudging a faint tear that had dared to fall. Daddy, you promised you'd never be sad. The words came unbidden, a whisper from the past. He'd made that promise 2 years ago, when she'd found him sitting on the edge of his bed, head in his hands, on the anniversary of her mother's death. He lost his wife the day Sophie came into the world, life trading one heartbeat for another. Sophie had been his only anchor, the reason he learned to smile again. Now she was gone, and the ocean had swallowed the anchor whole. The train lurched forward, rocking gently as it cut through the darkness around him. Strangers scrolled their phones, read newspapers, murmured to each other. Jackson could have been invisible. Perhaps he was. Fullerton, the automated voice crackled. Overhead, doors slid open, doors closed. The world moved on. Jackson didn't. He didn't care where the train went, or if it ever stopped. Somewhere, buried deep under layers of cold and loss, something waited for him. But for now, he sat in the half-light of the subway car, staring at a picture of a little girl who would never grow up. And he did not yet know that fate was already on its way to sit across from him. The train rattled onward, each stop announced in the same hollow, mechanical voice. Each set of doors opening and closing like a heartbeat Jackson couldn't feel. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor, on the scuffed pattern of the subway tiles. Between his shoes. Then, somewhere behind the low hum of the train, he heard them, the voices, high-pitched, uncertain, trying to be quiet, but failing. We have to ask someone. The first whispered, no. The other shot back quickly. Mommy said never talk to strangers. The train jerked, and a cold draft swept down the aisle. Jackson lifted his eyes just enough to see them, 2 girls, standing just inside the doors, holding each other's hands as if letting go would make one of them disappear. They couldn't have been more than 8, maybe younger. Their matching pink coats were worn thin, the sleeves frayed. A patch of stuffing bulged from the seam of one shoulder. Their shoes, cheap sneakers with the soles nearly worn flat, were dusted with salt from the sidewalks. Identical faces, blue eyes too bright for the shadows of a subway car, framed by wisps of tangled blonde hair. One held a small teddy bear that looked as if it had survived more than one winter, its left eye missing, a seam splitting along its belly. They scanned the train's passengers, businessmen buried in their phones, a young couple whispering into each other's ears, an elderly woman knitting without looking up until their gaze landed on Jackson. They froze, as though something in his expression had pulled them in like gravity. The one with the teddy bear stepped forward. Excuse me, mister. Her voice trembled on the edge of courage. We're lost. Jackson blinked, slow and deliberate, like a man waking from a dream. Lost? His voice was rough from disuse. The second girl moved closer, putting herself between her sister and him with a protective instinct that struck him hard. We were trying to find our mommy, she said, but she's sick, very sick. We were staying with a lady down the street, but she fell asleep, and we wanted to get her medicine. Her words tumbled out quickly, as though afraid she might run out of time to explain. Where's your home? Jackson asked, his tone soft but steady. The girl's lip trembled. We don't have one anymore. Something stirred in him. Not sympathy, not yet. It was sharper than that, and instinct honed from years of making decisions, reading people, finding truth in half-told stories. The air between them felt charged, the noise of the subway fading under the weight of their small, desperate faces. And then, almost without thinking, the girl with the teddy bear began to hum. It was so soft at first he thought it was the hum of the train, but no, the notes were delicate, climbing and falling with the kind of fragile precision only a child could give. A lullaby. Jackson's chest tightened. He knew that melody. He had heard it before once, years ago when Sophie had come home from a street fair and hummed it under her breath. For days afterward, she'd said it was from a lady with a guitar and a voice like a dream. He never found out who that lady was, but here it was again, floating across the air of a half-empty subway car, sung by a girl who should have been anywhere but here. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Where did you learn that song? The girl paused mid-note, eyes darting to her sister before answering. Our mommy taught it to us. Said her daddy used to sing it to her when she was little. Something inside Jackson went still. A thread had been tugged thin, fragile, and leading somewhere he wasn't sure he wanted to go. The train began to slow for the next stop, brakes squealing. Jackson had a choice. He could get off, pretend this was none of his business, keep drifting through the frozen city until grief swallowed him whole, or he could stand. And the second the doors opened, he knew he wasn't letting them out of his sight. The train's brakes screamed against the tracks, a harsh metallic wail that echoed through the car. The girls didn't move toward the doors. They just stood there, looking at him as if he were the only person in the city who might care enough to listen. When the doors hissed open, a gust of frigid air swept inside, wrapping around their thin coats. The older sister's hand tightened on the younger's. Jackson rose before he could think better of it. Come on, he said quietly. They followed him, their footsteps small but hurried, as though afraid the subway might swallow them back if they lingered. The three of them emerged onto the platform, the stale underground air giving way to a blast of winter wind that clawed at their faces. Jackson noticed the way the younger girl Lily tried to hide her shivering, pressing her cheek against the teddy bear's battered fur. They climbed the steps into the open night. Street lamps painted the snow a pale orange, turning the city into a frozen stage where every movement seemed slower, heavier. Traffic hissed over wet pavement. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed. Where were you trying to go? Jackson asked, his breath curling white in the air. To the pharmacy, Emily said, her chin dipping. It's from Mommy's medicine. She ran out 2 days ago. She said she'd be okay. But the girl swallowed, her voice breaking. She's not okay. Jackson scanned the street. The nearest drugstore was 3 blocks away, and judging from their shoes and the redness on their cheeks, they'd been walking for a while before they ever reached the subway. All right, he said, pulling his scarf tighter. First, we're getting you both somewhere warm. They didn't argue, though he could feel their unease. He led them into a small cafe on the corner, the kind of place that still smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the morning rush. A heater hummed softly in the corner, and the windows fogged from the difference in temperature. Jackson ordered 3 hot chocolates and guided them to a booth in the back, away from the draft near the door. When the steaming cups arrived, Emily took hers with both hands, holding it close without drinking, as though it were more valuable for the heat than the taste. Lily blew gently at the surface before taking a cautious sip. It was then Jackson saw the paper sticking out from Lily's coat pocket, a folded, creased document that had been opened and refolded so many times the edges had gone soft. He didn't ask about it yet. Instead, he asked, "What's your mom's name?" "Clara Miller," Emily said. "She's in the hospital a lot, but she always comes back." "Where's home?" Emily's eyes darted to Lily, who shook her head almost imperceptibly. "It's not there anymore," Emily murmured. "They locked it. We can't get inside." The waitress passed by, and for a moment they all fell silent. But Jackson's eyes kept drifting back to that piece of paper. Something about it bothered him, the way Lily kept it close, the way her small hand brushed against it like a talisman when the girls were focused on their drinks. He finally said, That paper in your pocket. What is it? Lily's eyes widened, and for a second, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she slid it out and pushed it toward him. The paper trembled in her fingers. It was a hospital discharge summary. The name printed at the top read, Clara Miller. The date was 2 weeks ago. The reason for hospitalization was vague, just complications. But what caught him was further down, where it listed an emergency contact. The name had been crossed out so heavily it was barely legible. Still, the first letter was clear enough, J. And for the first time in weeks, Jackson felt his pulse quicken. Jackson stared at the hospital discharge paper until the words blurred. He blinked hard and set it on the table between them, careful not to startle the girls. Where did you get this? His voice was calm, but there was a thread of urgency. Beneath it, it was in Mommy's bag. Emily said softly, she told us not to lose it. She said it's the only thing that might help. Help with what? Jackson wanted to ask, but the weight in his chest was growing heavier by the second, and some instinct told him not to push too fast. Outside, the wind howled down the street, rattling the cafe door in its frame. Jackson glanced at the clock. 8:40 p.m. The streets would be emptier now, more dangerous. If these had been walking alone earlier, it was a miracle nothing worse had happened. Do you know the address here? He tapped the bottom of the paper. Emily shook her head. We just know it's far. Mommy said if she didn't come back, we should go there. Her voice trembled, but she didn't say why. Jackson folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. All right, we'll go now. The twins looked at each other, hesitant but trusting. When they stepped outside, the city felt sharper, the cold like teeth. Snow had thickened, softening the edges of street lamps and blurring the horizon. They walked in silence for several blocks until Jackson hailed a cab. The driver, a stocky man in a knit-cap, eyed them in the rear view, but said nothing as Jackson read off the address. The cab lurched into motion, weaving through slick streets. The address wasn't in a polished neighborhood. They crossed into a part of the city where streetlights flickered and shop windows were barred. The snow here was mixed with grit, mounted against curbs. Jackson felt the air change, not just colder, but heavier. The cab slowed in front of a narrow, 3-story brick building wedged between a pawn shop and a boarded-up laundromat. A faded sign above the door read, St. Mary's Transitional Housing. It was not a home, not in the way a child should imagine one. Jackson paid the driver and stepped out, the twins clinging to his sides. They climbed the chipped concrete steps, and he rang the buzzer. After a pause, the door opened just enough for a woman in a bulky sweater to peer out. Her eyes were sharp, but tired. Yes, she asked. Jackson explained to girls. Their mother, the hospital paper. The woman's gaze shifted to the twins, softening slightly. You'd better come in, she said, unhooking the chain and opening the door wider. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. The lobby was dimly lit with mismatched chairs pushed against the wall and a bulletin board cluttered with flyers for free meals and job programs. The woman Margaret, according to her name tag, led them to a small office. She rummaged through a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. This is the only Clara Miller we've had here, she said, setting it on the desk. She came in a month ago, left suddenly 2 weeks later. No forwarding address. Jackson's heart thudded. Did she leave with anyone? Margaret hesitated. No, she left alone. But she asked me something strange before she left, if I'd ever heard of a man named Jackson Reed. The air in the room seemed to thin. The twins looked up at him in confusion, and Jackson's mind began to race, searching for a reason, a connection, anything that could explain how a sick woman from a shelter knew his name before he could speak. Margaret added, she said if she didn't make it back, to tell him she was sorry. The name sat heavy in the air. She knew me. Jackson's pulse quickened, a heat blooming beneath his ribs despite the winter's grip. The twins didn't understand, of course they didn't, but their eyes darted between him and Margaret, sensing the shift. How exactly did she say it? Jackson asked. His voice was measured, but it carried an undercurrent of command, the same tone that had once silenced boardrooms. Margaret crossed her arms, studying him. She didn't say much at all, just that name, yours, like she thought. You know her, do you? Jackson shook his head slowly, but inside, something itched at the back of his mind. Clara Miller. The name rang faint, like a half-remembered melody you can't place but know you've heard before. Margaret glanced at the twins again, her tone softening. She loved them, you could see it, but she was afraid, jumping at shadows, kept checking the door. Whenever it opened, Emily shifted, uncomfortably. Mommy said people were looking for her, she whispered. The words landed like ice water down Jackson's spine. What kind of people? Emily's gaze fell to the floor. Bad people. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. Jackson's instincts, the same instincts that had built his empire, told him this was more than some sad coincidence. Clara Miller wasn't just another struggling mother, and she wasn't just lost. He knelt in front of the girls. We're going to find her, but you have to tell me everything you remember. Everything. Even if it doesn't seem important. Lily hesitated, then said she had a box. A little wooden box with a lock. She told us never to touch it. What was in it? Jackson asked. We don't know, Emily said. She hid it in the floor under our bed. Margaret frowned. There's nothing like that here now. The room's been cleared since she left. Jackson stood, his mind already moving in sharp, precise lines. What happened to her belongings? City storage, Margaret replied. But they don't keep them long. After 30 days, she didn't finish. She didn't have to dot 31 days since Sophie's death. 30 days since Clara vanished. The timing clicked into place like a lock turning. Where's the storage facility? Jackson asked. Margaret hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and an urgency in his voice. Finally, she scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. The twins clung to him as they stepped back into the night. Snow had thickened into a white curtain, muffling the city's noise. Jackson hailed another cab, giving the driver the new destination dot as they drove. The city outside shifted from tired neighborhoods into industrial blocks, warehouses looming like silent sentinels. The cab stopped at a chain-link gate crowned with barbed wire. A single light burned in a small office beside the lot dot inside. The air smelled of coffee gone stale and old cardboard. The night clerk barely looked up from his phone. Storages. Closed. You'll have to come back tomorrow. Jackson reached into his coat, pulled out a business card, and slid it across the counter. I'll pay triple whatever the late fee is. The clerk glanced at the name on the card, did a double take, and without a word, grabbed a clipboard. Sign here. 10 minutes later, Jackson was in the narrow, dimly lit aisle between steel doors. The uni Mark C. Miller was at the far end. His hand hovered over the padlock, a strange reluctance rooting him in place. He turned the key. The door rolled upward with a metallic groan. Inside was a neat stack of boxes, a frayed suitcase, and, sitting squarely on top, a small wooden box with a tarnished brass lock. Exactly as Lily had described. Jackson stepped forward, the girls behind him. He lifted the box, feeling its weight, not heavy enough for money, too heavy for keepsakes. He set it on the floor and tried the lock. It didn't budge. Shall we open it? Lily whispered. Before Jackson could answer, headlights swept across the far wall. Tires crunched over snow outside. The clerk hadn't followed them in. Someone else had. The low rumble of an engine idled outside, steady and predatory. Jackson froze. Every sense sharpened. He wasn't a man easily intimidated. He'd stared down hostile investors, ruthless competitors, but this was different. This wasn't business. This was survival. He set the wooden box back on the floor, his body instinctively angling between it and the twins. Stay behind me, he murmured, his voice low and urgent. Emily's hand found Lily's, their grip white knuckle. A shadow passed across the slatted steel door of the storage unit. Boots crunched in the snow. Then, silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but watching. Jackson's mind worked fast. The box, the missing mother, the way Clara had been jumping at shadows. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been looking for her, and now, maybe, for what she'd left behind. The sound came again, metal clinking against metal, a lock being tested. Not their lock. Yet, he stepped to the side, peering through the narrow gap where the door met the wall. A man stood there, broad-shouldered, wearing a black parka, hood up. His face was hidden, but the way he scanned the row wasn't random. He knew exactly which unit to find. Jackson turned back to the box. No time to figure it out here. He reached for it, but the brass lock seemed to stare back at him, almost daring him to open it. His fingers itched with the urge. Instead, he slid it into the frayed suitcase, zipped it, and hefted the weight into his arms. The footsteps stopped. Then, a voice low, with an edge of mockery, "Mr. Reed." Jackson's stomach tightened. He hadn't given his name. He stepped forward, still holding the suitcase, forcing his voice into calm. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer, Instead, he tapped the steel of the door with a gloved knuckle. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you," Lily whimpered softly. Jackson glanced at the girls, then back at the silhouette. "I think it belonged to a woman named Clara Miller. You looking for her too?" The pause was telling. Then, she should have handed it over when she had the chance. The tone wasn't just menacing, it was final. Jackson's gaze swept the unit. Only one way out. The front, where the stranger was. The narrowness of the aisle made running risky with the girls in tow. He made a decision. "Stay close," he whispered to them. Then, in one swift motion, he rolled the steel door up the rest of the way. The man stepped forward, but Jackson was already moving, the suitcase clutched tight. He cut hard left, away from the main exit, moved slipping slightly on the ice-crusted pavement. Shouts erupted behind them. Another figure appeared at the gate. A second man, blocking the cab they'd arrived in. Jackson's breath steamed in the frozen air as they sprinted between the looming warehouse units. Every instinct screamed that the box's contents were worth more than money, and that these men would kill to keep it or to get it back. A narrow service alley opened ahead, lit only by the flicker of a failing street lamp. He herded the girls into it, the suitcase digging into his arm. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed a faint promise that help might exist if they could just hold out. "Why are they after us?" Emily cried between breaths. Jackson didn't answer, not because he didn't know he had an awful, growing suspicion, but because saying it aloud would make it real. The alley ended at a locked chain-link gate. He glanced over his shoulder. The men were closing in, their shapes cutting through the snow like wolves through brush. No time to think. Jackson shoved the suitcase through the gap at the bottom of the fence, then lifted the girls, one by one, pushing them to the other side. He was halfway through himself when the first man's hand clamped around his ankle. The grip on Jackson's ankle was ice cold through the fabric, like a vice clamping down. Instinct took over. He twisted hard, but heel driving into bone. The man grunted, loosening his hold just enough for Jackson to wrench free and roll to the other side of the fence. "Run," he barked to the girls, snatching up the suitcase. They darted down the frozen sidewalk, their breaths puffing in quick bursts, their small legs pumping as hard as they could. Jackson's chest burned not from exertion, but from the pounding realization that whoever those men were, they would not stop. Behind them came the metallic rattle of the chain-link fence being climbed. The street ahead was dim, but at the corner, an old brick church stood with its front doors ajar, warm light spilling onto the snow. Jackson didn't hesitate. He pushed the girls inside, slammed the door shut, and dropped the wooden beam across it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of incense and candle wax. Rows of pews stretched toward the altar, where a lone priest, startled, turned to face them. "Hi." Jackson didn't give him the chance. "We need a place to hide. Now." The priest's eyes flicked to the girls, their flushed cheeks and frightened eyes. Then to the suitcase. Without a word, he motioned toward a side door. They moved quickly into a small vestry lined with worn hymnals and robes. Jackson set the suitcase down on a wooden table, his hands trembling not from cold, but from the weight of the decision he'd been avoiding since the storage unit. He met the girl's eyes. "If I open this, we might not be able to go back to before. You understand?" Emily's voice was a whisper. "It's Mommy's, isn't it?" Jackson nodded slowly. The brass lock clicked open with a sound far too loud in the tiny room. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was not cash, nor jewelry, nor anything he expected. It was a stack of journals bound in leather, others cheap spiral notebooks with bent corners. On top lay a single sealed envelope, his own name written in careful, looping script. His heart slammed against his ribs. He tore it open. "Jackson, if you're reading this, it means they found me, or they will soon. I'm sorry for bringing this to you, but I trust no one else. I never told you the truth about Sophie. She was my sister's child, your child only by love, not by blood. Your wife knew, but she made me promise not to tell you until Sophie was grown. Those men, they want what's in these journals. They prove what Reed Enterprises was built on, and who it destroyed. You'll understand soon. Please keep the girls safe. They're my daughters. They're all the family you have left." Clara's words blurred in front of him. Sophie not his by blood, Reed Enterprises tainted. And these two small girls, his only living link to the truth, from the chapel beyond. The doors boomed under heavy blows. The men were inside. Jackson stuffed the journals into the suitcase and looked at Emily and Lily, his voice steady despite the quake in his chest. "You stay behind me. Whatever happens next, we walk out together. The vestry door shuddered under a violent impact. Somewhere deep inside, the frozen place in him cracked not from grief, but from something fiercer, purpose. The next blow would splinter the wood. Jackson tightened his grip on the suitcase and moved to meet it.